Hey guys, just real quick before we start, just wanted to remind you that on June 24th of this month that I will be at Too Many Games, and no, I'm not a vendor or having a booth or anything like that. I'll just be walking around, and if you're a fan of the channel, come by, say hi. Would love to hang out with you and meet some fans. So, yep, that is June 24th, 2023 in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. So, you live in PA? Come on down, and I'd love to see you there. Alright? Alright, enjoy the rest of your regularly scheduled content. What's up? What's happening? What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to Animation Station, your number one stop destination for anything and everything animation, including a sponge that lives in a pineapple under the sea. Welcome back to SpongeBob Season 4 episode reviews. Welcome to Selling Out. One of probably the most relatable and adult episodes in all of SpongeBob. I will explain. It's not one of the best of the season, but it is a great episode, and I'm going to tell you why. So, let's get started. In this episode, Mr. Krabs sells out the Krusty Krab to a Blandy company. That's literally called Blandy. Howard Blandy of the Blandy Bland Franchising Company. And as a result, he gets a shite ton of money and decides to retire. And at first, well, you're happy for him. It's just like, well, you know what? He's worked all his life. He deserves to go out and do what he wants to do. But then he soon realizes that's not all it's cracked up to be, and ends up getting a job at the newly named Krabby on Mondays, where it turns out it's pretty much turned into McDonald's. Yeah. Commentary and hilarity ensue. Meanwhile, SpongeBob and Squidward, very much in the background of this story, are, well, struggling to adapt to their new environment. And then by the end, through insinuating circumstances, the place is destroyed again, and Mr. Krabs gets the Krusty Krab back, and it's pretty much back to the status quo. So, just the concept of Mr. Krabs retiring, especially because he loves making money so much, as he explains very well in the opening song, which, yes, Clancy Brown isn't a great singer, but you know what? It works for what it is. It's a time killer. It's a decent song. I don't mind it. So, him retiring is definitely a surprising move. And not only that, it makes the episode a bit more interesting, because now there's a new dynamic. Because now that Mr. Krabs is off doing his thing, now we have just SpongeBob and Squidward trying to adapt to their new boss, to their new restaurant, and to all the new rules. Like, there's literally a gag where Squidward almost gets sent to, I think it's public relations again, and it turns out it's a big guy that just wants to beat him up. Like, that's a funny little nod. And yeah, it's just a very adult episode with a lot of very unique and interesting layers to it. Like, I know it's a bit hard to explain. It's easier to see rather than to try and explain, so I'll just say my two highlights of the episode, give it the final score, and we'll move on to the next one. My two highlights of Selling Out are two pretty good moments. The first one is, without a doubt, the retirement montage. Like, it starts out, like, pretty cool. Like, he goes to a Hook museum, but then he slowly gets bored. And then he decides to paint fruit, but he ends up painting Krabby Patties because the Krusty Krab's still on his mind. And then he goes golfing. And then he breaks the fourth wall. Wait a minute, I hate golf! That part really got me. And then the second one is the really clever, sharp commentary from Carl, who's the manager of the Krabby on Mondays. He says, well, look around you. Our customers are completely content with the contrived and the mediocre. Like, it's not really a funny line, it's just a very smart and clever line that, like, really makes you think. Like, again, the McDonald's comparisons, but yeah, it's just a really smart and clever line. And if you're an adult, you'll get a lot more out of it than you will as a kid. But it still has some funny moments. It still has some pretty memorable parts. Like, again, the Krusty Krab being destroyed for the millionth time. And while it's not the funniest way it's been destroyed, it's still pretty good. And the ending is nice. It's a nice ending. So, are there any problems with this episode? Just one, and that is that after the song and after the montage, it gets a bit slow, because then he is trying to figure out what to do, so he tries to go ask Pearl if she wants to go out and do something. But then Pearl kicks him out of the house, which I'll admit is a little funny, but yep. And then we get a kind of meaningless metal detector scene where he ends up in the Krabby on Mondays and decides to get a job as a busboy. So, yeah, I feel like they could have cut that part out and probably put in a scene of SpongeBob and Squidward having a chat about the new rulebook and all that stuff. Like, they could have found another way to utilize the time. And like I said, the song's just okay. Though it is pretty catchy, I'll give it that. So, yeah, Selling Out's a pretty great episode of the show, especially for adults, because it's a relatable episode, it's a very mature episode, and the commentary, even now, is actually pretty relevant, which, again, is surprising, considering that SpongeBob that we're talking about here. But, yeah, it's adult, it's mature, it's funny, it's entertaining. It's just all the elements that make a SpongeBob episode great. If it didn't have that unnecessary bit with Pearl and the metal detector, which completely slowed down the pace to almost hitting a brick wall kind of way, it would have been probably a 9 or a 10, but as it is, this is an 8. It is a great episode, and if you're an adult, you absolutely gotta watch it, because it has some pretty deep, adult, mature themes that I think you guys can really appreciate. And if you're a kid, I can understand that this episode may be a bit slow for you, but trust me, it's still worth watching. Okay, that's all I gotta say about Selling Out, and already I almost made an entire episode review. That's almost 10 minutes for one episode. But I just had a lot to say about this one. So, yep. Thankfully, though, the next one's pretty short and sweet. Let's take out Funny Pants, shall we? Okay. This one's a bit hard to talk about because it's not a bad episode by any means, but it just has some really annoying parts. The biggest one being SpongeBob's constant annoying laughing, especially since by this point they added a freaking squeaky toy sound effect. Like, no. Never do that. That's how you annoy your audience. However, when you watch the entire episode, it all kind of makes sense, because it's kind of like one of those old grim fairy tales, or a cautionary tale, of when you do something too much, it can end up hurting you in the long run, which I will give credit to this episode for that, but still not a great episode. So in this episode, Squidward gets fed up with SpongeBob's constant annoying laughing, just like the audience, and he decides to make up a story about a laugh box, where if you use it too long without giving it a break, it burns out. In other words, kind of like a human throat, in a way, because if you talk for too long without breathing, or without having a drink, or if you really push your voice too far, it will break, and your throat will absolutely hurt. Like, that part is understandable. So SpongeBob then has to try not laughing for 24 hours after Squidward advises that. But that's easier said than done when there's pies, whoopee cushions, and banana peels. All the classic comedic slapstick gags. So then SpongeBob decides to bury himself under the sand for 24 hours to stay away. But then it looks like he lost his laugh, and it's replaced with his crying. Thankfully, though, Squidward realizes it went too far, and he goes to fix it and talk about how it was just something he made up, which got which gets SpongeBob to laugh again, and then Squidward laughs in his face for being so gullible and falling for it. But then it ends up coming around in the end when it turns out that the laugh box is actually real. And yeah, the ending blows. It almost turns this into a straight-up Squidward torture porn, because yes, Squidward did kind of bring some of that misery onto himself, but having him stuck with SpongeBob's laugh in the end, no. That was one step too far. Like, no. That was stupid. That was beyond friggin' stupid. Okay, so do I have any highlights in this episode? Yes, I have two, and they're in the beginning. During the scene where Squidward's making up the story about the laugh box, he takes SpongeBob's temperature, but then decides to stick the thermometer in the fryer to try and say he has a much higher temperature than he actually does. And Squidward's acting, being so worried and everything, is just amazing. And then the second one is probably one of the most memorable parts from this episode. Patrick and the banana peel. Like, it's that classic gag that just somehow always works. Because Patrick not only trips over it once, he trips over it 2 times, then 3 times, and then a 4th time, and then SpongeBob finally stops him and tells him what's going on, and then he trips again as SpongeBob's running away. Patrick in this episode is great, but yeah, the ending really drags it down, and SpongeBob's obsessant crying and laughing really get on my nerves. But if you skip those parts, the rest of the episode's pretty solid, and I give it credit for trying to be, like an old grim fairy tale, trying to, teach a lesson. Problem is, it just really fell on its face and jumped off a cliff with that horrible ending. But outside of that, it's not a bad episode, but it's not a great one either. Final verdict is a 6. It's decent. I give it credit for, again, trying to be a cautionary tale, but the horrendous ending and the obsessant crying and laughing just really, really drag it down. But, you know what, I've seen worse, and it's nowhere near as god-awful as Good Neighbors, so I'll give it that. Well, that's it for this one. Thanks for watching. See you next time for the Aquatic Neptune SpongeBob. All hail the magic conch.